to Maxed Out Man, helping you become the man you were made to be.
Hey guys, it's Kevin Davis from the Maxed Out Man podcast. This is episode number 22. I'm here with Tanya MacIntyre, who is the founder of Red Roof Recovery. That's I say that 10 times fast, right? Author, speaker, and addiction recovery specialist. She's here to share with us today, and I'm super excited to have her. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Kevin. I'm always willing to talk to anyone who's willing to listen. So thanks for inviting me.
I think we're all kind of that way sometimes. Hey, if you want, just kind of run down, that's your basic, who you are, what you do. But if you want, just go ahead and run down, I know you have tons of experience and, kind of run down who you are, what you do, what Red Roof Recovery does, and then we'll kind of get into it and just have a discussion.
Well, I hail from the east part of Canada in a place called Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, a coal mining town. With very, very seasonal opportunities. So by the time I was 18, my dad gave me a luggage set for graduation. So that was kind of my hint to get going. So I've been on the road ever since, and I ended up settling in a place where I never thought I'd end up, is in the employment hub of this country. It's called Ontario. So I'm now living in Ontario. I've been in Ontario longer than my home spot of Nova Scotia. And, just etching out a living wherever we could. The employment hub saw me as a broadcaster for 22 years in various radio stations. I did a little bit of TV, but not really comfortable in front of video. I joked that I've got a great face for radio.
I've been told that same thing.
I just recently retired because my addictions progressed. My drug and alcohol addictions progressed over that 22 years because we become the company we keep. And everybody I hung around with was basically doing the same things. So I started to pack up negative news and started embracing positive media and dealing with my addictions. And that included a stint in a 30-day rehab, and then 8 years of 12-step meetings, relapsing every year, and just learning from every relapse. And then finally finding something called cognitive therapy with a group called SMART, founded in Mentor, Ohio, about almost 30 years ago now. And cognitive therapy resonated with me. It seemed to work for me. It doesn't work for everybody, but it worked for me. And then with COVID, everybody migrated online and addiction rates doubled. And both my husband and I lost our jobs because of vaccine mandates. And we thought, what the heck are we going to do now? And the only other thing I knew was recovery. And I thought, well, I'll just share what's worked for me. And I have had 5 consecutive years now of complete abstinence. So it works for me.
Congrats. That's awesome.
Thank you.
I come from my dad's an alcoholic. He's been recovering for, 20, 30 years now, a long time. But like they say, you're always recovering, right? And he had cigarettes, and then I don't know what his addictions are now. He's in his early 80s, so maybe golf. My mom, we ended up having to eliminate our relationship because she was just kind of too toxic. But I kind of grew up in a family where she was, alcoholic, drug addict, all that kind of stuff from a very young age. And so I was kind of the adult in that relationship at 7 or 8. So all that to say, I have a familiarity with the addictive side of things. And that's interesting. So what are the stats with COVID and addiction?
They're not good, Kevin. Addiction rates and suicide rates with them have more than doubled in North America. I don't know about the rest of the world, but in North America, they've more than doubled. And we're going to be feeling the fallout of this for generations to come, long after I've shuffled off the mortal coil. Your generation will still be dealing with it, and your children and grandchildren will still be dealing with it. It's unlike anything that we've ever experienced before. So I'm a big advocate for the power of a person that, I still go to 12-step programs. I never bash 12-step programs. There's a lot to be said for them. I think they're excellent personal development programs, a little too shame-based for my liking, but I still go to 12-step meetings because it has excellent peer support.
Mm-hmm.
And I still sit there in my circle, and when it comes to my turn, I say, "Hi, I'm Tanya, and I'm grateful to be here." I don't label myself an alcoholic or an addict or a junkie or a druggie or anything else, because those labels are not helpful. Labels belong on food. That's where we should leave them. And I'm grateful to see the medical community finally evolving to stop using stigmatizing language like drug addict and alcoholic. It's finally, science is uncovering the reality of addiction, is that it's a chronic condition, a medical condition that affects everybody differently. And we're going to have, different reactions to different drugs and different approaches, different modalities. So the key, I think, is, I like that acronym KEY, keep educating yourself, find what works for you, and then do more of it.
That's awesome. I would, can you go into more of the differentiation and what they're doing now? Because I'm not well versed, obviously, because I just called my mom a drug addict and my dad an alcoholic. So
I know, that's what I'm saying.
So, which is fine. This is not a world that I live in, necessarily. My wife's allergic to alcohol, and because of my upbringing, it just has not been alcohol, drugs, anything like that, other than maybe caffeine and sugar. She's a pastry chef, so I have my own sugar addiction, which I think so many people do. But it's not really part of our world that, we don't hang out with people that drink, and so unlike you being in the broadcasting thing where I'm sure there's alcohol in the studio at the time, we don't kind of run in that. So how are they differentiating those things? How does that fit into where it's like, this is a disease versus personal responsibility and all of those? I'd just love to learn more about that whole scenario.
Yeah, I'm still on the fence around the disease thing. Not sure how I feel about that terminology, because I think we fall into that a little bit too much. We can become our diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to kind of distance myself from that wording, because our words are powerful. And I often tell the story about outcome studies, because I'm really big on give me evidence-based results. I want to know what the outcome studies are based on the evidence. And there was a very significant study done in the United States at one of the major hospitals in an emergency room setting. And the people knew that they were taking part in an outcome study, but they weren't sure what it was. So we took the same group of people, the same 10 people working in an emergency room setting. And when you're introduced to a patient in an emergency room setting, you don't see the patient, you see a piece of paper, the admittance form. And the terminology used at that point, it's about 10 or 15 years ago, was substance abuser. And so now they've got this patient is known as a substance abuser, and then they are polled afterwards, they're questioned to say, okay, what is your opinion about this person? Collectively, all 10 of those emergency clinicians said that that person was culpable for their behavior, they were responsible for their condition, and that they deserved criminal punishment if warranted. So then weeks later, the same group of clinicians are introduced to this same hypothetical patient. This time, however, he is introduced on the same piece of paper, the admittance form, as having substance use disorder or alcohol use disorder, AUD, SUD. And now when that same group of clinicians is polled and questioned on how they what's their opinion now of this patient, they say that this patient, the same hypothetical patient, is now completely capable of a full recovery with a combination of medication and therapy. So that's the difference as to how we're using that language, those labels.
That's crazy.
I know. It can either create the stigma and perpetuate it, or it can diminish it instantly. So I'm really sensitive around how we talk about addiction and recovery, because addiction, as far as I can see, is a biological vulnerability. I think we're born with a deficiency in dopamine, and we learn early on that we can relieve this deficiency with drugs, alcohol, some behavior that gives us that normal regulation of dopamine. But then, of course, we're training our brain that it's going to need more of it to get the same results. So it progresses over time. That's my belief, and everything that I'm learning kind of reinforces the idea that it's a biological vulnerability. It's not a character flaw. It's not a moral failing. I'm not even sure it's a disease, but it's a chronic condition. It's a complex condition that affects all of us differently, and it's going to take an individual approach, a one-on-one approach, which is what I've developed in a short period of time. We've also kind of stuck with that age-old remedy for addictions when military personnel were the most common people affected by addictions, and they could only get 28 days off in a row. So, and the only place to get recovery was in a hospital setting. So they would get 28 days off and they'd be sent to the hospital to get better. And we have kept this modality of recovery. It's old, it's ancient.
That's even the movie, right? That's the Sandra Bullock title of that Sandra Bullock movie. Right.
I mean, I was in a 30-day treatment facility. I'm grateful that I was there, that it was there. It was very costly. Did I need 30 days? Not likely. So what I've done, I've created something. Who is my ideal client? Me. Someone like me. So I was a professional who was managing, just barely managing my addictions. I didn't lose my house. I didn't kill anybody drunk driving. I didn't have any DUIs. I still had a bit of money in the bank. You know, I had a house, a car, a career. So I was what some people call a high functioning person with addiction, which again, I don't like that terminology either. I was managing my life just barely by just hanging on. And I didn't want to announce to my colleagues that I was challenged by addiction. Who does, right? I was the be all end all, right? That control thing. However, if I had been able to take 1 week and check into somewhere and have one-on-one intensive therapy, like, you know, get me the resolution right now. I need it now. That resonates with me. And it seems to resonate with a lot of people who are in that position I found myself in all those years ago. So that's my approach. It's 1 week. It doesn't take a long time to recover. It takes a persistent willingness to exert consistent efforts to help yourself.
And that's CBT. You're doing cognitive therapy. And so that, how does that work? You know, I talked to a lot of different people we've talked about porn addiction and sex addiction and all these different things, which essentially it comes down to that dopamine, norepinephrine receptors and how your brain uses it and all that. So with cognitive behavior therapy, how does that address the chemical nature of, you know, dopamine receptors and how, you know, because essentially with any addiction, you, as I understand it, there is not a complete rewiring, but there's a dopamine sensitivity issue and those kind of things. Does the brain just do that automatically?
Well, we need to retrain our brain. And that's why cognitive therapy, cognition, is just thinking. So it's questioning all of our thoughts and retraining the brain. So we've trained our brain to react to substances and behaviors. To give us that hit. So now we have to retrain the brain to not need those hits, to get them in healthier ways. So we have a pharmacy living inside of all of us. All we have to do is activate that to generate our own healthy dopamine levels without substances and behaviors. So we do things like eating good, healthy food. If chocolate is your thing, you know, a little bit of chocolate can sometimes give you that little hit that you need. Exercise. Getting out in nature, walking, cycling, meditation. I'm not a big meditator. I like the short meditations that are available on places like Insight Timer. One of my favorite Canadian doctors, Dr. Lowe, he's a pediatrician at one of the hospitals on the west coast of Canada. He has healthy mental health meditations, and they're 3 minutes. I love them. I love his voice. And he's, very structured. I like a structured, give me fast. I want it fast. Give it to me now. So yeah, I like the 3-minute meditations. I can sit and give my attention to that. And that seems to work for me.
I do cold plunges and kind of that's kind of tends to be my prayer time, which is, essentially a little bit like meditation. And the research is pretty solid with norepinephrine, dopamine response over the next 3 or 4 hours after you've done the cold plunge. And I can tell, like, I purposely don't do it on Sundays typically because I'm trying to give because it's a systemic stressor, which is part of the response. But I can tell the difference in energy levels, my attitude and all that on the days that I don't do it. And we're not nuts. Like I'm not crazy like some of the guys are that do the Wim Hof method. But we're at 51 degrees for 3 minutes, and which is cold enough. But I mean, some of these cold plunges go down to 34 degrees Fahrenheit, obviously, and so you're there close to 0 Celsius, just right above freezing. And wow. I don't do that, but the physiology of that is very similar. The physiological response. I also do heat therapy. I have a little sauna that's underneath my stairs.
That I could do.
Yeah, I do both. So I exercise, heat therapy, cold plunge, and that. And so yeah, that's interesting that there is no pharmaceutical intervention required. I guess you could say that in terms of.
If you know what, medically assisted therapy, MAT, medically assisted therapy is quite effective for some people, and I don't poo-poo that at all. It's just there's always a danger that that safety net becomes a hammock. And I think we're better. Like my shtick is at the end of my podcast and my phone calls. Everything I do, even when I'm leaving my friends, I say, "May the force be with you," and remember, you are the force.
Right.
You are the force. And I think people who are fans of 12-step programs, they've relinquished their power to a power greater than ourselves. And I could never get on board with that because. But I like the snappy slogans, right? Take what you need and leave the rest. So I still go to 12-step meetings because they do have an integral part of my life, for sure, for the peer support.
And yeah, the community aspect of those programs is probably the most effective part of it. But everything else gets kind of wrapped up into it. And I never really thought about the shame factor, that whole, making amends and, kind of going hat in hand to everybody you've ever wronged, which I do see, the forgiveness factor. I always say forgiveness is for us, not for the person we're forgiving. Yeah. And so I see that there's a benefit with that clearly, but yeah, I'm sure that the community factor is definitely something that's
huge, right? The opposite of addiction is connection. So I think wherever we can get that connection is important. And I think, when the whole world migrated to Zoom during COVID, it was nice to have that connection, but it's not the same as a personal connection.
Yeah, and I think different people handle that kind of thing differently. I think it depends on, a little bit introvert versus extrovert and some of those. I mean, it was funny because I had another guest a couple of days ago last week. We were talking about extroverts and how dopamine is a central part of an extrovert's, the way they actually get a dopamine hit by being with other people. And so it's that, and supposedly they get that hit every time they're with people, where someone like me, who I play an extrovert on the internet, but I'm actually more introverted, I don't get a dopamine hit from other people. So it's really, it's interesting that different, but however, most of my friendships are worldwide. I don't have a ton of friends locally. So I've actually gotten used to developing relationships that are more remote based. But in my case, I don't feel slighted that way. But like you said, everybody tends to be different. But clearly the data would show that during COVID, all of that stuff just completely crushed us as a society, for sure.
And how great for you, Kevin, to willingly admit that you are an introvert, right? Because The name of your program, Maxed Out Man. I've been married to a wonderful guy for 32 years, and we have discussions all the time about I am so grateful that I was not born a man in this world. Because what you guys have to do, your whole purpose is to perform and provide, right? It's like you just stay on task. Real men don't cry. You just get her done.
Yeah.
And it's a huge burden to carry. So good for you for being vulnerable, for reaching out, for admitting that, I'm an introvert. It takes every ounce of energy to come up into this camera to say this. So yeah, I admire that. So thanks for being out there and representing the maxed out man.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, the whole maxed out man thing has actually dual meaning. And when I did it, I didn't really think about that it could mean someone that is max at their max. It's more of maximizing your potential and who you are as a man. But it's funny that it's both. But I've had 3 or 4 guy guests on here that are kind of like, let's be a full version of what a man can be, masculine. But masculine, just had a guy on the other day that we were talking about being masculine, but embracing the more traditional feminine side, which is caring and support and loving. And I've been married for 28 years, actually. And and that's what I've tried to be for my bride. I always call her my bride, but it's definitely a challenge. I joke with my girls who are now 25 and 24. And I'm like, you have no idea what it's like to be an upper middle class white guy in today's society. So
you're a pariah now. Yeah.
That's right. We definitely are. So if you're someone, how does someone come to that realization and as part of their journey that it's, that someone like yourself who ultimately we're not down in the gutter, figuring out how you woke up outside of this bar one weekend. It was like, how do you get to that point for someone that's listening and is like, well, I know I kind of have a problem, but everything's still kind of going well. Like, what does that road look like for people?
I think everybody's different. What I love about cognitive therapy, so I was a facilitator with a group called SMART, Self-Management and Recovery Training. And again, I love the structure that they have to their program. So there are stages of change. And I relapsed in 12-step programs for 8 years. So I wasn't ready to accept my condition for what it was. That moderation of drinking and drugging is not in my wheelhouse. It's not something I'll ever be able to do. I had to accept that I would need to go and learn how to enjoy a beautiful meal without a glass of red wine. And it's just something I wasn't willing to accept for 8 years. Talk about stubborn. So I think everybody is different. Even in 12-step meetings, when I share my story, I've had some people say, well, you weren't a real alcoholic. I'm thinking, okay.
I didn't realize there were I didn't realize there was a hierarchy of alcoholism.
Apparently, yeah. But everybody's rock bottom. That's another term I dislike. Everybody's rock bottom. Everybody's unmanageability is going to be different. And mine was being sick and tired of being sick and tired. Mm-hmm. I was just dragging my ass through my life every day. And, sometimes staggering to bed, like on the stairs, on all fours, getting upstairs to go to bed, because my husband and I were on different shifts all the time. So, we used to communicate by notes for most of our marriage. And, I did most of my drinking alone. When I announced that I had addictions to drugs and alcohol, most people were shocked because I hid it so very well. I did most of it alone.
So you weren't a real alcoholic, but you were really good. You were really good at it, evidently.
Yeah. So I would be able to socialize. I could go out and have 2 or 3 drinks with friends, and then I'd come home and have 2 or 3 bottles.
Wow. Yeah. That's and how did that impact your husband? And what's his role as the, supportive or unsupportive partner in this scenario?
Well, he was amazing for sure. He still is. I mean, he lived with me through my addictions, and now he's living with me through my recovery. A whole different ball game. right? And he said, when you come out of the rehab, he said, I was really kind of afraid for our marriage because I thought maybe you wouldn't like me anymore when you were sober.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So he stuck with me. He's a wonderful life partner. I lucked into making a good decision.
Yeah. I did that as well. And I'm not sure. Sometimes I wonder if my bride wonders about her decision making, but yeah. So I definitely. So how have things changed? And granted, my assumption would be that things are, even though you have different challenges, things are much better than they were before.
Yeah, definitely. I would never have imagined, and I love being able to talk to people now about their addictions because I attract people like me. I am my ideal client, and lo and behold, the universe is delivering clients to me who are just like me, and I can totally relate because I lived that way for most of my adult life. So now when I'm talking to men and women who say, oh my God, I can't even imagine living, like, what's the point of living life if I can't, have a ecstasy pill or something to get that little bump of that I need, or a couple of shots of this to give me, and glass of wine with dinner. You mean I'll never be able to have a glass of wine with dinner ever again? No, I can't. Like, what's the point of even living?
Yeah.
And I can totally relate to those patterns of thinking because I did it for 8 years, relapsing in 12-step programs. It's like, oh, my life will suck if I can't drink or drug. Like, this is all I've known all my life. So what am I going to do if I can't do this?
And that's the habit part of it. I mean, it's part of it. Yeah. So that actually just becomes part of your habit. Like for me, like I've never had a glass of wine with dinner. So like it would be super weird, but we had some issues early on in our marriage because we made the decision that we weren't going to have alcohol in the house. And so like, my wife's brother is a drinker, and it's like the whole family, that's just a big part of it. They talk about wine, which you don't ever really want to have conversations with vegans about veganism, CrossFitters about CrossFit, cigar lovers about, about cigars, or wine drinkers about wine, because they're all the same. They all just want to talk about it, and it just becomes this obviously very important thing with them. And for me, alcohol really, I don't think it tastes good. It doesn't really improve anything, at the end of the day. So that's something that just doesn't really resonate with me. So it's good that it probably gives you a great opportunity to speak to people at a level that someone like me, I could never speak to them this way.
Well, I think realizing what alcohol is, like you said, it's, the fact that the conversation stops in a restaurant when this bottle of wine is being introduced to the table, and the conversation has to stop over a bottle of grape juice.
Yeah.
That's been fermented. And like you say, it doesn't taste very good. It's not good for us at all. And
it's a toxin. I mean, it's literally a poison in your body.
Absolutely. The fact that it's legal is nothing short of madness for me to think that it's, because of course the taxes are considerable. And even through COVID, the fact that the government in all its wisdom decided to keep the liquor and beer stores open.
Yeah, it's essential business, right? That's the...
Yeah. So I think, again, that keep educating yourself to the fact that, our government endorses poison because of the tax base that it brings in. And the self-love aspect, people who know me say, oh, you're not going to talk about that Louise Hay Mirror exercise again, are you? And I don't know if you're familiar with Louise Hay. Her legacy is Hay House Radio. She was an extraordinary woman who talked about the fact that we are beaten up from the time we're born. And by the time we are adults, we don't like ourselves very much because we've been socially conditioned that we need to go out and buy something or take something to feel or look better. So she has a mirror exercise. You can YouTube her, Louise Hay Mirror Exercise. And she used to do it with this little heart-shaped cosmetic-sized mirror. And she said, now I just want you to look at yourself in the mirror. And she's just it was one of her books actually changed the course of my life. It was the guy who ran the treatment facility in Spain. That's where I ended up going in.
Wow.
Yes. And he was actually had a Buddhist background, even though the program, the modality they were using was 12 steps. He was a Buddhist, and he gave me Louise Hay's book, You Can Heal Your Life, as part of my homework for the 30 days. So that was a gift, because she was the soft, warm hug I needed when I needed it, right? When the student's ready, the teacher appears. Louise Hay was that soft, warm hug I needed, the one I never had from my own mother. So her voice resonated with me. The more I read the book, and it was like, oh my God, I love this. So I would go into the mirror, and I was so lucky that I was the only woman on that side of the complex. So I had a bathroom to myself.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And I used to go in, and, she would say, you can do this. I love you. You're worth it. You just go in there, you look in your eyes, and you say, I love you, and you're worth it. So I remember the first day, Kevin, like it was yesterday. And this was, oh my gosh, almost 15 years ago now. And I put my hand on my heart, and I looked in the mirror, and I can't even remember the last time I looked at my eyes in the mirror. And when I went to open my mouth to say, I love you, I just started to sob and cry. I couldn't even utter the words. But I listened every morning. I kept on going back. I really want this. I really need it. And it took months. I mean, I couldn't even do it in the 30 days I was there, but I had her book with me, and I read it, and her words still resonate with me. Rest her soul. She was still is a valuable mentor to me, and will be until I shuffle off the mortal coil. So that mirror exercise, I always encourage everybody to start your day that way. Look in the mirror, put your hand on your heart, and say, I love you, and you're worth it. And it works.
What's your experience? Obviously, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with the Saturday Night Live sketch with Al Franken.
Of course, yeah.
And so, like, we literally make fun of that. So yeah. I'm curious what your experience. My guess would be that for men, that's much more difficult but it's kind of both, right? Like many women have more of a self-loathing than men do. However, in order to get to that point that you're discussing is probably more difficult in a different way. It's difficult for each of our genders, but what's your experience seeing men and talking through men doing that? Because I would feel, I mean, that's like get in touch with your feelings stuff, right? Like, blah. So, but like, I mean, that's one thing I've been, as I have more of this discussion, these discussions I found easier to explore, but I'm wondering what your experience is there.
It's interesting that you ask about the experience with men, because men have a very difficult time with it. So what I suggest to men who can't utter the words, I love you, because it's just not there. Take a picture of yourself as a child and put the picture of the child on the mirror and tell the child that you love the child. That's easier for men to do, and it has the same result.
Oh, that's good. I like that a lot. I actually have a picture up on my wall of my bride as she's probably 5 or 6. And I've always, I want to treat her not as a little girl, but in that same, like, as if I'm caring for her with that heart, and that might sound, I don't know if that sounds chauvinistic or whatever, but it's something that I do. So that kind of inner child stuff. I've had a guest on to talk about the different stages of inner child and all that. But yeah, that's great advice. It's funny that we make fun of that, so much, and that probably makes it more difficult. What do you think about, it's kind of a weird dichotomy with our society, right? Because we literally are the most ego-driven society, that ever existed, thanks to social media. Most of it is, cultivated, right? Everything is cultivated, but we have a website that is billions of people that's called Facebook. Like, we want to show people our faces, yet we are probably the most miserably oriented people in terms of we love ourselves, but we hate ourselves at the same time. It's a really weird time.
I don't think we love ourselves. If we're referring to social media, I call it anti-social media. I think it's a really unhealthy social conditioning programming that's happening with social media. And again, the fallout from social media is going to be felt for generations. And I think all the bigwigs in social media don't let their children use social media for...
Absolutely. They don't, none of them do. It's really, that probably is pretty telling, right?
Right? You think that we would take a lesson from them, that they don't expose their children to it. So why are we exposing our children to it?
Yeah, that's 100%.
So that's where the conditioning comes from. Mainstream media. I was part of mainstream media for 22 years, Kevin. And, you know, I always say that they perpetuate the FUD factor, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. And that's what they're in business to do. My job was to create embellished facts and come up with a sensational headline. If it bleeds, it leads. The more sensational, the better. It's a downward spiral that just doesn't help anybody.
Yeah. We just watched a documentary on the Watergate scandal. It was a 3-part documentary on Hulu, which I thought was really interesting. But obviously propaganda has always existed. And being someone that, along these lines of this conversation, because you were in broadcasting, this has nothing to do with addiction, but actually it probably does. But I'm interested in your thoughts on how, because you made the statement that you've moved from the negative aspect to positive news, right? And how does positive news fit into the objective news that we no longer have, because we're 100% subjective, entertainment-based news? Because they were, they showed a lot of Walter Cronkite, right? Walter Cronkite was kind of the poster child of what objective newsman on TV looked like, just report the facts. And but I'm just curious about your thoughts on that, because it's something that I feel like I hate the media. I try not to. It's horrendous that I don't like, I'm a conservative, but I hate Fox News. I don't watch CNN. I don't watch MSNBC, any of those broadcast networks. It's just not for me. But
good. I'm so glad to hear that, Kevin. And when I suggest to people that they take the diet that really works, I say, take a media fast. Don't watch, read, or listen to news and feel how much your life improves. And they say, oh, come on. Like, I can't live like an ostrich with my head in the sand. And I'm thinking, no, that's not what I'm suggesting. Just don't expose yourself to mainstream media messages, because all that's doing is conditioning you to believe that you're not good enough until you go out and buy something or take something to feel better or look better. And just taking back your power, right? You are the force. So take back your power. Stop being sucked into consumerism. I mean, women are beaten up by mainstream media all the time, but we keep feeding these multi-billion-dollar industries of beauty and fashion and cosmetics and, injecting Botox and breast enhancements. And I love Celeste Barber. She's an Australian lady who's quite popular on social media. Thank goodness. She's one of the positive aspects of social media. And she makes fun of some of the fashion messages that we're getting. And she does an excellent job on it. And I like the fact that she's exposing the absurdity of these industries and encouraging men and women. Men are getting the same messages. My nephew, he has something called Williams syndrome, a neurodevelopmental disorder. So he is, physically and mentally affected for the rest of his life. Thankfully, he doesn't have high behavioral or medical issues, but, he's like a perpetual 5-year-old. And my sister is very strict with him around media, but he loves YouTube. And before she paid for the message-free version, he would go and he would have 1 hour on YouTube. Now, YouTube is the second most watched medium in the world now. And just after 1 hour of being exposed to those 15-second messages, he came back to the living room to announce that he had to lose weight and remove all the hair from his chest.
That's right? Crazy.
After just an hour. So those are the messages that we're getting constantly. I think the last number I heard is that, I think our brain, we have 50 to 70,000 messages that we're processing all the time, and most of them are negative. Our English language dictionary has 3 times as many negative words to positive words, so we have to work 3 times as hard to even formulate a positive thought. So we've got all of these things working against us, so it takes a constant, persistent effort to offset it, to say, hold on, I'm going to be the gatekeeper of my mind here, to be more selective about what I'm absorbing into my mind. It takes a persistent effort.
Oh, 100%. And it's funny because if I now occasionally, like, we'll watch CBS News or something one night, I can't even get through the first 5 minutes because I'm like, the subtle, when you're not used to hearing it, the subtle wording that is so manipulative, the way that they say, I mean, even the way they talked about the COVID, everything that happened with COVID and the, I mean, complete fabrication in some cases, in a lot of cases, but just, I mean, they can talk about almost anything and put a spin on it that changes the meaning, but not enough that most people notice, but enough that it gets your attention and implant something. And that negative message towards a particular group or a particular activity or yourself, whatever those things are. Cause like, again, it's a joke, but like to be a conservative white guy in America, like you said, we're the pariah, right? Like we're meant to not to feel badly about who we are as a person.
And for what your ancestors did. It's like, Oh my God, come on, people. Let's stop trying to reconfigure the past and just move into the future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how do those messages fit into the addiction model, the modality, and how does that kind of get us to where we're, I mean, you can use COVID as an example if you want. Obviously, there's lack of social interaction and too much free time and quote unquote free money and, all of those things. How does that all fit together?
Well, like I said, addiction affects everybody differently. And I think I agree with the Canadian doctor, Dr. Gabor Mate, when he says, I mean, he worked in Vancouver's East Side for a dozen years, and that is reputed to be the most chronically addicted population in North America. And he said, everybody I saw on a daily basis who were challenged by addiction, they all had one thing in common, and that was trauma from childhood. Now, we all process trauma differently. Was I traumatized as a child? Well, I didn't really feel traumatized. I wasn't really abused. There was an early childhood divorce. My dad ended up being the single parent because my mom was addicted to alcohol. So yeah, maybe there was a trauma there. I had to help raise my baby sisters. So I was very young raising a child. That's probably why I didn't have children of my own. I think parenting is the most important job in the world, and I didn't feel equipped to do it for sure. I could barely look after myself. So I think, we all process trauma differently. We all process life differently. And for me, it came to, I think, a point of acceptance, unconditional acceptance for myself, for others, and for life. And you talked about the forgiveness earlier. I often say to people in 12-step programs, if they do come up to me after a meeting to say, I noticed that you didn't say you're an alcoholic or an addict. Why is that? And I kind of jokingly say, well, I'm actually infiltrating these meetings now with something called cognitive therapy. So it only takes really 4 steps to recovery, for me at least. Learning to love myself, learning to forgive myself, learning to forgive someone who isn't sorry, and learning to, what's the 4th one? Oh my gosh, I'm embarrassed now. I can't remember. It might come to me. It's in the ether there somewhere. But then there's that unconditional love, learning to love yourself unconditionally. Hard place to get to for a lot of us because we're socially conditioned to be consumers. You need to buy something or take something to feel better or look better. So it's resisting consumerism. And I don't even know if I answered your question, Kevin. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, basically I was trying to get at, kind of what COVID and some of that, push us more towards addiction. But I think that's a great, that's a great summation of what it is that we're looking for.
The 4th one, learning to forgive someone who isn't sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's lots of people aren't, right? That's
right. We have to accept that some people aren't sorry for hurting us. Yep.
Yeah, one of my guests last week, we talked about just with men and kind of that the self-love aspect for men is a little bit different. I think that and you can speak to this, but since this is a largely male audience, or I mean it's kind of mixed, but it's, maxed out man, right? So we tend to be very hard on ourselves. I'm a big self-deprecating humor kind of person, but at the end of the day, like I'm a highly functioning low self-esteem kind of guy. So, which I've pretty much determined that all men have low self-esteem, and we just mask it in different ways. We all have different masks. But in terms of like loving yourself as a guy, what do you like? The same strategies? Like it's because there's, we do have a different makeup than women do. And, are there certain strategies you use that may vary for men versus women in that regard?
Well, you could try the picture of a child, of yourself and
like
a child
that.
in the mirror, and talk to the child. You could go by and just, give yourself a high five or a thumbs up. You got this. I really, really like you.
Yeah.
Right? You're doing a good job. Whatever works for you. You just, I think the self-endorsing is really important.
Mm-hmm.
And, I also, I'm involved with another group, and this is not addiction recovery. This is life recovery. It's called Recovery International. We have a division here in Canada as well, Recovery Canada. And that promotes the work of Dr. Abraham Lowe, who incidentally was hanging around with Dr. Bob and Bill of the 12-step program in the mid-30s. And I think it was Dr. Abraham Lowe who actually developed what we now call cognitive therapy, because he was encouraging people then to look at your thought patterns, really delve into them, describe them. And he gets into angry temper or fearful temper. So two kinds of temper. And the angry temper is temper that we direct this retribution outward around other people. And then the fearful temper is the temper that we direct toward ourselves. That anger that's directed inward, that manifests into chronic illness, I think. So he started this in the 30s when he was working as a doctor in institutions where they were giving people shock therapy. And it wasn't working. In fact, it was creating more problems than anything. So he wanted to come up with an alternative. And he has something called the 4-step method. And again, it's give me something fast.
Yeah.
Those 4 steps. Yeah, I can do the 4 steps. And it really encourages you to don't get caught up in the drama of life adversities. Just be very succinct about what's pissing you off. Like one sentence. What's got you worked up? What's got these heightened emotions? Because heightened emotions, I think that was part of my thing very young, is that I had all these heightened emotions because of all the adult shit that was going on in my life, and I didn't know what to do with it as a child. So then I discovered, I could take a shot of vodka or whatever was going around with the adults, and suddenly, that diminishes that anxiety, that angst, those heightened emotions. So with Dr. Lowe's approach, you just one sentence, what's got you worked up? What's generating these high emotions? And then what are the emotions? Because I didn't even know what my emotions were. I just knew that I wanted them to go away. I wanted to numb them, to get away from I didn't want to be in my skin anymore. So now describing these emotions, it was a real challenge for me because I didn't really know how to describe my emotions. I had numbed them for so long. So he gets into real details about how's it feeling, what's it doing in your body. And in these groups, I encourage you to check out one of the meetings, recoveryinternational.org. And every meeting is different. So if you hit one and don't like it, go to another one, because the different facilitators do just administer the program differently. So you can, it's one of the, I tell people the same thing about 12-step meetings, right? It all depends on who's chairing the meeting and what kind of people are there. Just keep going to meetings and find what works for you. And then you get feedback from the people in the meeting with self-endorsements or tools, they call them. And they're like affirmations and self-endorsements. And I think that's really powerful because life kicks the crap out of us. And we are conditioned by society that there's something wrong with you if you want to celebrate, even though we're an achievement-based society. If you celebrate your achievements, it's frowned upon, right? Even my dad used to say, "Oh, you can break an arm that way," patting yourself on the back.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Right? And it's like, no, even though we are an achievement-based society and we're told that we are self-centered and egocentric and stuff, I don't think we are. I think we're an altruistic society. Most of us are empathetic and compassionate and generous, but we've been socially conditioned to be consumers. So again, I think it's being aware of this programming, this social conditioning, and being selective about these messages and what you're, like I often say to people, and I don't mean it to be mean, I just want them to be aware of how they've fallen into this consumer trap. They've got a double car garage and their 2 cars are parked outside because there's
Right.
no room in the garage because it's filled with crap that they don't use. But that's because we've been conditioned to do that as consumers. We live in a capitalist society, so we need to consume. And here we are.
Yeah. Yeah. I do some real estate development, and I can tell you that one of the best investments is what? Self-storage. That's what.
Multi-million-dollar industry.
Yeah.
That
That's
30 years ago, right?
Yeah. Right. That's a pretty high margin thing. And, even the backside of that where people don't pay the rent and then you sell what's in it because they never saw it, any of that.
Yeah. And make a series on television. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But to your point about celebrating things, I do a lot of stuff where I'm telling people as part of your morning routine is setting some goals, doing kind of basic today goal setting. But one of the primary reasons to do that is so at the end of the day, you can celebrate your wins. So like that's super important to not, because my wife and I just had this conversation about the to-do list always has to-dos on it. There really is no, I have 10 things on my list. I'm going to get 10 things done. The end. Okay. Give me the next 10 things. It doesn't work that way, especially for someone like me, that's an entrepreneur with way too many brands and businesses and all that. But what we try to do is we set realistic goals in the morning that we know are achievable for that day. And then at the end of the day, we can review them, or the next morning we can review them. And it may be as simple as, call that one friend that you haven't talked to in a while, or shoot them a text, or, email, or however you want to communicate. But that part of, and that seems to be a logistical step that most men can kind of get behind, is because it's, it's goal and achievement, but it's not like, hey, I need to get everything done on my to-do list by 10:30 this morning, because you're never going to do it. But you can pick those things that I think can help you, celebrate your wins.
Yeah. My daily motto is, what can we do from where we are with what we have today? So very much living in the present. In 12 steps, we often recite the poem yesterday, today, and tomorrow. Is that we, often find ourselves ruminating about the past, which creates a lot of depression, or we are projecting into the future, which creates a lot of anxiety. So learning to stay in the present is really important. I think that one day at a time. And I've also adopted the Tibetan cup ritual. It's the cup of life and death. Some people find it a little bit morbid. So at the end of the day,
it's pragmatic, not morbid, right? Like that's the.
At the end of the day, I take this little ornamental cup and I turn it upside down. So the Tibetans believe that at the end of the day, you turn the cup upside down and it represents not just the end of the day, but the end of your life. I'm kind of hoping that's how it goes for me, that I die peacefully in my sleep. That would be a good way to go. And then in the morning, when my eyes open, it's like, wow, I get to do it all over again. And I turn that cup up and I give thanks and gratitude, express gratitude for all my blessings. And I'm ready to give and receive. And there is something really powerful about that process.
I like that, because the imagery is not only, that cup is empty in the morning, and then it's empty at night, right? Because like you filled it during the day, which is the present, but then it doesn't. I don't know if this is part of it, but in my mind, it can represent that once it's turned over, the future, you can't put these false narratives into the future that you're creating for yourself, right? Mm-hmm. So that's great. Well, I think that that's a good place to kind of wrap things up. I don't know leave us with maybe one other piece of advice, and you can reiterate, whatever else you want to. But I'd love to hear kind of that, and then we'll kind of get you, how to find you.
I think staying in our comfort zone, it's a great comfort. It's a wonderful place to be, but it's not a good place for growth. So I think pushing ourselves outside of our comfort zone. So for me, the social conditioning around addiction. I kept my addictions hidden for a long time. And it wasn't until I started speaking publicly about my drug and alcohol addictions that I started to feel a new and different kind of direction. That it's like, okay, we've been sending the wrong message that addictions deserve to be anonymous, right? It's this covert operation. And I think we need to be loud and proud about the struggles of not just addictions, but of life and life adversities. What did the Monty Python, life's a piece of shit when you think of it.
That's right. Yeah.
And how are we going to deal with life adversities without killing ourselves with harmful substances and behaviors? I think empowering ourselves to get outside of our comfort zone, to reject the social conditioning and programming that we get. I mean, we're sent to school to become obedient, complacent taxpayers. Start fighting that early.
All right.
The earlier, the better. Refuse to get sucked into consumerism, and embrace your power, because we are powerful people. And I most recently pushed myself out of my comfort zone to become involved with community theater. I'm going to be playing Hamlet's mother, which is really funny. And it's something I would never have imagined doing even just a couple of years ago. So I think really pushing yourself to try new things. I even tried rock, like the wall, rock climbing.
Rock climbing wall, yeah.
Thought it was something I might enjoy. No, I hate it. But at least I tried it.
Right.
Right? Just to keep pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. And speaking of theater, one of my favorite quotes comes from Shakespeare. All the world is a stage, and all the men and women merely players.
Mm-hmm.
So decide what role you're going to play in life, right? And refuse to wear the mask. Just be you and play the role that you want to play in life, because it's short.
Yeah.
So live it to the max.
100%. I love that. So I'm guessing we're not going to find you on Facebook and Instagram, but I know you have a LinkedIn and a website, right?
Thank you. And you will find me on all social.
Oh, okay. You just don't, you do what I do on a lot of them, which is they call it post and ghost, right?
That's right. Got it. Yes. Don't engage much, but I'd like to just keep my message consistent for sure.
Okay. So that's where do they find you on those?
Red Roof Recovery.
Okay.
I'm so grateful that, I've got this love-hate going on with Google now, but
yeah.
If you just Google Red Roof Recovery, you'll find me. Okay,
perfect. Well, I'm congrats on the 5 years, right? You're on 5 years, so that's awesome. And yeah, if anybody's either dealing with the addiction side, or they think they may need to deal with it, feel free to reach out to Tanya, or somebody locally. Look at you call it cognitive therapy or cognitive behavior therapy. Those are some great resources as well. So I appreciate you taking the time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Kevin. May the force be with you, Kevin. And remember,
because it's in me, right? I am the force, right? Yeah, right. I love it.
If you're looking to really maximize your life and become the man you were made to be, head over to maxedoutman.com and get your journey started today.